Well, let's now welcome our second speaker this morning, Stephen Scheeler. Stephen is a seasoned business leader of digital transformation in a mobile age, and over a 25-year career has delivered outstanding business results across multiple sectors, most recently guiding Facebook Australia and New Zealand to world-leading performance as managing director. Stephen drove Facebook's efforts in Australia and New Zealand to help businesses better use Facebook's family of apps and services to deliver against their business objectives. Stephen is a high-impact speaker on the highest-profile media stages and is a member of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's Knowledge Nation 100, top innovation leaders in Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome Stephen Scheeler. Well, we know that you've certainly got a very impressive CV, which we'll be talking about in a bit. But first of all, I just want to talk about back when you were little, Stephen Scheeler. Tell us a bit about your family, where you're from, and how you got here.
Of course. You can tell from my accent, hopefully. I wasn't born in Australia, but I've been here for almost 30 years. And I'm originally from a small town in upstate New York, just outside Buffalo, New York. If those of you who may follow the Buffalo Bills football team, I grew up in the shadow of that stadium. And so my parents were real estate agents. My dad served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. And I just went to a small town high school and grew up very kind of Leave It to Beaver, for those of us who remember that TV show. Very Leave It to Beaver sort of American suburban upbringing. Beautiful. I didn't appreciate it as much at the time as I do now.
So what brought you from there to here then?
My path was very much kind of the path of kind of small town frustration. I had cabin fever or small town fever. I wanted to get out of where I grew up. I go back now, I love it, but at the time when I was a teenager, I wanted to get out. And my dream was always to go to Europe. It was, in fact, Ireland was the country I wanted to go to. Don't tell me why. I kind of got hooked on Ireland. And so how am I going to get out of, this is the 70s, and so how am I going to get to Ireland as a 13-year-old? Well, I went to a local Rotary Club, and I talked to them about exchange students. And in those days, that was the only thing that, they were the only guys who did exchanges. And they had an exchange just to one country, which was Japan. So it's about as far from Ireland as I could possibly get. I went to Japan as a 17-year-old, as a 16, 17-year-old, and spent almost spending 3 years there. And that sent me into a journey where I spent really the rest of my life in the Asia-Pacific region. To this day, I've never been to Ireland, so still on my bucket list.
So you settled in Australia a while ago now.
Yes.
What was that?
88, I first came here.
Wow,
yeah.
Okay. Tell us then about Facebook. How did that role come about?
Facebook was really a happenstance event for me. I was running a small startup at the time, a technology business that's still going today. And my career had spanned corporate Australia. I'd worked for some very big Australian companies over the years, and I'd also did some startups and tech businesses on the side. And at that time, Facebook had just come to its IPO, so in 2011, 2012. And I had a friend who was at Google, and he was going over to work at Facebook. And to be honest with you, at the time, I would have thought, what am I going to do for Facebook? What does Facebook even do? That was the question we get asked. What do you do at Facebook? People just sit around, nothing really. Everybody thought Facebook just ran itself. And I kind of had that impression too. I had a chat with some folks at Facebook, and I got really interested in not just what the platform could do, what the business could do. I didn't meet Mark Zuckerberg at the time. I met him later, but I just learned more about Mark and his vision and what he was trying to do in terms of connecting the world and really changing the world in some powerful ways. And that just got me excited. So I joined Facebook, and I never looked back.
Facebook Australia and New Zealand became one of the company's most successful global markets during your tenure. Just take us back to the early days, though, when it was first starting out. Is there anything like The Social Network?
You're referring to the movie?
The movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen the movie The Social Network?
It was a little bit. It's a good movie. Very good. I'll tell you a little story. When that film came out, Mark was not completely on board with the film. He didn't cooperate, and it doesn't show him in the best light. But he said everyone's going to see this movie anyway, so he actually just took every employee, and we all went to see The Social Network. Everybody. We went to the cinema. And so we all saw it. All saw it together as Facebookers.
How did he react?
How did he react?
Yeah.
I think Mark's Mark. He's just like, well, I'm a public figure. These things are going to happen. But it was a good film. I thought it was a fantastic story. I think it's 50% true. Probably 50% not true.
That's more true than most Hollywood biopics.
It's fiction, right? It's fiction, but it's a great film. But the early days of Facebook were, there were legendary, what became legendary stories of the partying and some of the crazy behavior. I didn't know Mark in the very early days, but I worked with some folks who did, and they said, well, they would tell stories about being on the streets of London or Dublin or New York, and Mark was just lying on the ground. People were pouring drinks into his mouth, and he was a partying 22, 23-year-old in those days. But if there's one leader that's changed a lot in the past 10 years, it's Mark Zuckerberg. He is in a very different place today.
We will talk a little bit more about him down the track, because he's got this sort of cult status about him, so I want to get your take on him. As far as staff numbers, was it just two of you working in a little office space? How did it look at the time?
There had been a little landing team in Australia back in those days. There were 2 people originally, and then it grew to 5 to 10. When I joined, there were about 10 folks here. But it was really very much a social network in those days. If you think back to the early days of Facebook, there was no way to advertise on Facebook in the early days. It was really just a platform that brought people together. Famously, if you've seen the film, Mark was very opposed to advertising, and that's true. And it took a while for the platform to bring advertising onto it. But even in the early days when there were ads, it was still to try to drive outcomes like likes and fans and engagement. And those are good outcomes, but they're probably not the ones that are really measurable and matter to business. So that's what we did in those days, and we had small teams to do it. When I came on board, the job was really to professionalize and take Facebook from an adolescent business to an adult business and build a more professional sales and marketing organization.
Could you ever have imagined back then that Facebook would turn into what it is now, this global behemoth worth hundreds of billions of dollars?
Probably yes and no. I can remember the early days when I joined Facebook, and I was talking to, just before I joined Facebook, I was talking to a gentleman who was an investor in the business I was running, a very big investor. And he was very wealthy. And he was saying to me, oh, this is a big mistake. You shouldn't go to Facebook. The business you're running is going to be much more successful. And at that point in time, in retrospect, seems crazy, but I kind of took it seriously. I stopped and I thought, and I talked to my partner about, am I making a mistake? Should I really go to Facebook? Because the share price was tanking. The company had just listed, and it was not very successful. And Mark was seen as, not a great leader, and there were questions about his leadership. So I had some reservations at the time. But the reason I did go with Facebook at that time was I saw just the power of it's the power of human beings and how we connect. And Facebook had just tapped into that in such a simple and deep way that in a way Facebook is just a reflection of human behavior and human society, but done in a way that technology makes it really simple and scalable. And that's the realization I came to. And when you get inside of Facebook, you see the numbers and you see the way it was growing, and you just say, this thing is not going to stop at 100 million people or 200 million people. It will, or someone will go to billions. And